Hey, this is Digital Byte Computing. Today we are going to look at what potential questions you can ask a potential prospect employee that is joining your company for a systems admin or a systems engineer role. There are a plethora of questions that you can ask them, but we're going to go through some questions that I generally tend to ask when I'm interviewing around some basics in IT, basic systems, servers, storage, networking, those sort of things. We're going to look at the questions. You may yourself be responsible for the hiring of staff, perhaps in an HR position or in a position of IT management as a team leader or management. So this may be something that could benefit you. As I said, these are questions that I tend to use. Feel free to use them. And there are a whole bunch of questions that you can expound on from these questions. So let's crack onto these right now. Okay, so server-based questions. We're going to break this into two parts, into physical and virtual. What is DNS? Ask them, what is DNS? People should be able to tell you, a systems admin engineer should be able to tell you what DNS is. What is it used for? Translating from a readable to a machine IP to a host name, etc. What are the different types of DNS records? They should be able to tell you there's A records, there's PTR records, there's C names, etc., etc. And ask them to give you specifics of why you would pick one record over another and a scenario of why you would use one record in DNS. How does a computer on a corporate network get an IP address? So I plug a computer into the network, how does it get its own IP address? So they should be able to answer things like, well, if it has a static IP, then that's how it gets it. Somebody's put it in manually. If it doesn't have a static IP, then it goes down to your network and tries to find a DHCP server. That's the clue. DHCP is how a computer gets its IP address. So then I'll ask them, well, what does a DHCP server broadcast? What does it give out? So other than your IP address, a DHCP server will also be able to give you your gateway, your DNS IPs, etc. So they should be able to understand what DNS is, what its purpose is. If I have two servers on my network, server A and server B, and they have lost connectivity to each other, they can't communicate with each other, what steps would you take to try to diagnose why the communication has been lost, and what would you do to try to get the communication back? So they should be able to talk about being able to trace route to each other. Can they ping each other? Is there firewalls in between them that could be blocking access? Can they remote into them? Things of that nature. So just sort of try to delve in the steps that they would take to try to diagnose why two servers cannot communicate to each other. What is your experience around racking and stacking of server infrastructure? Are you familiar with going into data centers, into data rooms and comms rooms and physically racking devices? Racking servers, doing the cabling, perhaps patching them into storage, into network switches, etc., etc. What is your experience in physically racking? Because it would be good to get somebody who knows the background in the software, but if they don't know how to physically put the stuff in, you're going to have a problem. Ask them about what sort of virtualization technologies are they used to. It could be things like VMware, Citrix, Hyper-V, etc. And then we maybe want to expound a little bit on what that looks like. For the purpose of this, we're going to focus on VMware and we're going to ask some questions regarding VMware. So we're going to ask them, well, what's the size of the environment that you're used to? Depending on your company, you may have a large size or a small size number of VMs that you administer. So having them to explain what sizes they're familiar with gives you a better understanding of whether they're going to be the right fit for you. So how many VMs are in your previous environment? You're looking at 200 VMs, you're looking at 1,000 VMs. Try to gauge that. Ask them how many ESXi hosts have you been responsible for monitoring and managing? Were you the sole person administering these hosts, or were you part of a team? Ask about different VMware versions. So are you running 5.5? Are you running 6? Are you running 6.5? Let them tell you the answer because they should know what version they are running if they're an administrator of VMware. Ask them what VMware vMotion is. What does it do? What is the purpose of vMotion? What is the purpose of DRS? Have you used DRS? Why would you need to use DRS? Do you have experience with SRM? Do you have experience with replication of VMs, perhaps cross data centers, across vCenter environments? What is SRM? What are you familiar with around the SRM platform? If I had to deploy 50 VMs within a few days, what would be the quickest way that I can do this? And you could do it via templates. You could do it via a VMware orchestrator tool as well. And if they sort of delve around those sort of areas and sort of talk about, well, you can standardize and you can customize, you can clone VMs to make them deployed quicker. Ask them what a VM kernel port is used for. And then get them to explain to you why you would use virtual switches, distributed or standard switches in a VMware environment. Patching is a very important thing in most companies. They should be able to tell you how often do patches get released. Most places are Microsoft shops, so we're talking about Windows Server patching here or Windows Desktop patching if they're using certain products. But how often do patches come in? So they should be able to tell you it's released every second Tuesday by Microsoft. Patch Tuesday is what they call it. They should be able to tell you that if they're going to be managing your patching in your environment. What tools they're familiar with. They should be able to say things like WSUS, perhaps SCCM. There could be some third-party tools that they have used for patching. I then like to ask them about scheduling. How do they schedule their patches? If you've got certain groups of servers, I've got my production servers, I've got staging servers, I've got my test servers, my development servers, what have you. How do you schedule your patching? All right, you don't want to do all your patches all at once because then you could have issues. So get them to sort of delve into, they should be able to do the patching of perhaps of the test and the dev service first, and then move into the staging servers and then move into production, seeing that approval process has gone through. They should talk about things like doing certain groups of patches out of hours because of business impact. They could talk about doing patching for servers within approved change windows that have been approved by the business if there is outages required to some core applications. We'll then dive into some storage related questions. What is the difference between a SAN and a NAS? Big question that a lot of people don't actually get correct, but explaining that the differences generally would revolve around SAN being block-based, NAS being file-based. SAN will be around iSCSI and fiber channel, etc. NAS will be around creating your CIFS shares, your SMB shares, your NFS shares, etc. What is a LUN? If they can't explain to you what a LUN is on a SAN, you've got a problem. They should be able to understand what a LUN is. Perhaps ask them what a storage pool is. If you've got a LUN, that is a group of disks that are created into a LUN, and then that LUN is then shared with the virtualization platform to be able to be read as a data store. So let them explain to you what a LUN is. What are the different types of RAID? Well, what is RAID and what are the different types of RAID? So this can fall into the storage category, but also falls into the server category. Because if they're dealing with physical servers and they're physically grabbing those disks on the servers and grouping them into certain groups, they're going to want to need to know about RAID. What is the differences between RAID 0, RAID 1, RAID 5, RAID 6, RAID 10? They should be able to talk about things like striping, parity bits, mirroring. What are the redundancies between each one? How many disks can I lose on a particular RAID group without losing data? Which RAID groups are better? Right? If I'm going to be deploying a operating system, what RAID group do I want for that? If I have a data warehouse or a database, what sort of RAID group would be best for that? What are the performance differences between my different RAID groups? Then we go into another practical sort of a question is if I've got a SAN and I've got some disks, what are the steps that I do to get that SAN to talk to a server, to perhaps a host, a virtual host that is acting as a hypervisor that I'm going to use for a virtualization platform. What is the difference between a NIC and a HBA? Active Directory. So this is Microsoft's AD. AD is used in majority of companies, so it would be a must for somebody to understand what AD is. Ask them to tell you about the structure of AD. What is it used for? What is the basic structure of AD? It manages your users, your computers, your servers, your domain controllers. You can create security groups, you can create computer objects, you can create distribution lists, all this sort of stuff from within your AD. What is the difference between an AD forest and an AD domain? What's the difference between a domain admin and an enterprise admin? What would I use a domain trust for? So if I've got a whole range of computers on my network and I need to say, all right, I want all of my computers to have their passwords reset every 60 days and the password must contain complex characters, what would I do? The answer should be group policy. have they had exposure to group policy? If so, give me some examples. What group policies are they familiar with? What can group policies do? Ask them, when have they needed to deploy a group policy? Every sysadmin and engineer should be somewhat familiar with backups, should understand why backups are important. Why do I need to do backups? Hence, you want to back up all of your data. You may want to make sure that your data is secure, that it's off-site, that you can restore data if data is lost. What software tools are they familiar with? Have they dealt with the big vendors? Have they worked with Symantec, with your backup exec, with your net backup? Have they worked with IBM's Tivoli? Have they worked with Commvault? All these different backup solutions, with Veeam perhaps. Get them to explain to you what backup solutions they're familiar with, how they've scheduled their backups, which backups, which servers have been backed up at what times. Do they do daily backups, weekly backups, monthly, yearly? What are the schedules? What are you familiar with? What sort of backup schedules would you recommend for us around that? Ask them what the difference is between an incremental, a differential, and a full backup. What is their preference over using, say, a disk-based backup over a tape-based backup? What are the benefits? What are the pros and cons between using disk and tape? They could explain that, disk may be faster, but isn't as resilient as a tape. They may talk about tapes being able to go off-site a lot easier, while disk isn't. They could talk about utilizing both. It goes to disk first, and then goes to tape, and then the tapes go off-site for a certain amount of time. What does a system state backup do? Just going to talk about things like backing up your registry, your configs, AD permissions, etc. And then I generally like to finish off with a few extra little bits and pieces, because some admins will have good exposure to the stuff that we've talked about, but may also have experience with other certain tools. So if they've got familiarity with Linux, I may ask them, what is your exposure to Linux? Have you worked with CentOS or Red Hat? Have you worked with these different Linux platforms? Are you familiar with Exchange? How have you configured Exchange before? What sort of Exchange experience do you have? I may ask them about networking. Have you dealt with switches, with routers, logging in, configuring routes between sites, between firewall configs, opening up and closing ports, managing security around networking? Are you familiar with load balancing? How do I load balance traffic? Setting up multiple servers for load balancing and using some sort of a load balancing hardware or software based solution to manage my traffic between these loads. What sort of antivirus solutions are you used to? Antivirus protection, spyware, ransomware, which is all the hot topic right now. So they're my general overview questions that I would ask for a systems admin, system engineer, prospect employee. So I hope you found this helpful. Happy for you to comment down below. Shoot me a note on this YouTube video on my channel. Subscribe to that channel. If you have any additional questions, any suggestions that you may have, anything that you thought that you may disagree with, would love to have a chat with you. So if you found that video helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel, Digital by Computing, just on the button there for more videos.